Francis Arsentiev, Sleeping Beauty. The story of Francis Arsentiev begins in a place that feels too fragile for human life. In May 1998, she stepped onto the slopes of Everest with a goal that almost dared the mountain to strike back. She wanted to become the first American woman to reach the summit without bottled oxygen. At that altitude, even breathing feels like drowning in slow motion. Every heartbeat is a struggle. Every step drains the mind, pulling you deeper into a fog where judgment disappears long before the body does. Frances climbed with her husband, Sergei Arsentiev, a man known as the Snow Leopard for conquering the Soviet Union's highest peaks. Together, they moved upward through winds sharp enough to peel skin and air so thin it barely kept them alive. But Everest has a way of turning minutes into threats. When they reached the summit at 2:30 p.m., daylight was slipping away. Climbers know the rule. If you're not turning back by 2 p.m., you're gambling with your life. They stayed too long in a place where the air doesn't forgive mistakes. On the descent, darkness swallowed everything. The couple became separated in the death zone where the body starts shutting down in a matter of hours. Sergei stumbled into camp alone. Francis never arrived. At sunrise, Sergei grabbed oxygen bottles and climbed back into the killing cold to find her. No one ever saw him alive again. That morning, another climber spotted movement in the snow. Francis, lying just below the summit, alive but drifting in and out of reality. Her skin had turned ghost pale from frostbite, and the cold had stiffened her limbs until they felt like stone. Climbers tried to help, but at that altitude, even lifting a human body becomes an impossible task. They faced a decision no one ever wants to make on Everest: stay with her and die, or walk away and live. Frances died alone that night, her body frozen in a peaceful pose that made strangers call her the Sleeping Beauty. For 9 years, she remained there, silent, untouched, and watching the mountain that took everything from her. David Sharp. 8 years later, Everest delivered a tragedy even colder than the wind that carved the mountain's ridges. In 2006, British climber David Sharp set out alone, carrying almost nothing that could save him. No Sherpa, no radio, barely any oxygen. He wasn't inexperienced, he was obsessed. He wanted a clean, pure summit, the kind that strips a climber down to raw instinct. But Everest doesn't reward purity, it punishes isolation. Sharp reached a rocky hollow known as Green Boots Cave, a place already haunted by the body of an earlier climber whose bright green shoes had become a grim landmark. It was here that David sat down, exhausted, freezing, and slipping out of consciousness. Temperatures were well below zero. The air was so thin that even thinking clearly became a luxury. Icicles clung to his eyelashes. His breathing slowed, and Everest began its slow work of shutting him down. As the sun rose, climbers started passing through. First a Turkish group, then others, dozens in total. Some offered oxygen, some tried to wake him, but the death zone steals strength from everyone, and no one could drag him out. Many assumed he was already gone. Others were too weak to help without risking their own lives. And so Sharp sat there, hours from safety, while more than 40 climbers walked past him chasing their own summit dreams. By afternoon, a Lebanese climber found him again. Sharp's face had turned black from frostbite. His voice was barely a whisper. The climber stayed as long as he could, speaking softly to a man who could no longer understand him. But when the cold started to bite into his own bones, he had to leave. Sharp died where he sat, surrounded by people yet utterly alone. When the world learned the story, outrage spread everywhere. Even Sir Edmund Hillary condemned the climbers who walked past. But on Everest, morality isn't simple. Survival strips everything down to instinct. And sometimes instinct tells you to keep walking. Rob Hall, 1996 Everest disaster. The next tragedy reveals a different face of Everest, not cold indifference, but a kind of brutal loyalty. In 1996, veteran guide Rob Hall led a commercial expedition toward the summit. Hall wasn't reckless, he was a master of the mountain, a man who measured every hour, every step, every breath. He set a strict rule: turn back by 2 p.m., no exceptions. But on that day, Everest wasn't playing by anyone's rules. Crowds packed the narrow passages near the Hillary Step. Ropes weren't fixed on time. Climbers were forced to wait in the death zone, breathing through oxygen faster than expected while their strength drained away. Hall's client, Doug Hansen, lagged behind, determined, exhausted, and desperate to reach the summit after failing the year before. Hall could have left him. He didn't. He broke his own rule to stay with Hansen, pushing upward long after it was safe. They summited late, long after the mountain had given its warning. Then the storm arrived. A wall of wind and white swallowed everything. Temperatures dropped to -40. Visibility collapsed. People became lost in places they had walked dozens of times. Hansen collapsed near the south summit. Hall stayed, giving him oxygen, speaking calmly, refusing to abandon him, even as the cold wrapped itself around his own bones. All night, Hall radioed base camp. His voice faded with every transmission. His oxygen was gone. His hands were freezing. He knew he wouldn't make it. In one of the most haunting moments in mountaineering history, Hall made a final call, not for help, but to say goodbye to his pregnant wife. He told her he loved her. He told her to take care of their baby girl. Then the radio went still. Hall died beside Hansen, loyal to the end, swallowed by a storm that took 8 lives in a single day. Hannelore Schmatt. Long before these modern tragedies, Everest claimed another climber whose story still chills people decades later. In 1979, German mountaineer Hannelore Schmatz pushed toward the summit with her husband and a small team. The weather was brutal, wind screaming across the ridges, snow slicing sideways, but Hannelore refused to turn back. She reached the top, exhausted but triumphant. But the summit is only halfway. The mountain takes its payment on the way down. As night fell, Hannelore and an American climber were too weak to continue. They stopped near 28,000 feet, completely exposed to the cold. By morning, the American climber had died. Hannelore tried to stand, guided by her Sherpa, but after only a few hundred feet, her strength collapsed. Her final words were simple. She asked for water. Then she fell backward, and the cold finished what exhaustion had started. Her body remained upright for years, eyes open, hair blowing in the wind. Climbers described her as a ghost watching them pass. She became a warning, visible, haunting, unforgettable, until a storm finally threw her body down the mountain. 4 climbers, 4 different dreams, one mountain that doesn't care. Everest is a place where ambition and danger sleep side by side. Some come home, some stay forever, and the line between them is thinner than the air above 26,000 feet. That's why these stories stay with us. Because standing at the top of the world means standing inches from the edge of everything we are willing to risk.